There are people who always seem calm, always prepared, as if nothing could shake them. Yet behind the smile they've practiced, there is a voice that never gets heard. This is the story of Rena, a woman who learned to keep everything inside, until one day she discovered that silence itself can wound. And sometimes, the simplest presence can open doors long kept shut. Rena never asked for help. Not because she never needed it, but because the habit grew slowly, like a seed watered little by little. Since childhood, she often heard words that made her doubt opening up. At 7, when she cried after being bullied by older kids, her father only said, "You must handle it yourself." At 10, when she fell off her bike, the neighbors laughed at her clumsiness. At 14, when she failed a math exam, her mother warned, "Don't tell anyone, it's embarrassing." It wasn't one event that changed her, but a collection of small voices repeated over time, gradually closing the door inside her. Day by day, Rena learned that asking meant exposing herself to judgment. So she grew into a woman who kept everything, wounds, worries, pride, sadness, in a room within herself, a room whose doors she rarely opened to anyone. At 31, she worked as an editor at a small publishing house in South Jakarta. She was known as someone always calm, always punctual, always with an answer. Her colleagues called her Miss Rena who never panics. She accepted the nickname with a smile she had long practiced, warm enough to make people feel welcome, but never deep enough to invite further questions. The only person who knew Rena wasn't fine was Mr. Harto, the building's lobby guard. Not because Rena ever told him, but because whenever she walked faster than usual, he knew the day was heavy. And he never asked. He simply placed a glass of sweet tea on the small table near the elevator, no words, no meaningful looks. Just tea. Just presence. Rena always drank the tea. Trouble came one Thursday. The manuscript she had worked on for 3 months, the debut novel of a young writer from Makassar, which Rena believed would be extraordinary, was rejected by the director with the reason, "The market is too narrow." Rena read the email 3 times. Then she closed her laptop, went to the restroom, locked the stall, and stood there for 4 minutes, breathing slowly. Then she came out, reopened her laptop, and began working on the next manuscript. She told no one. Not Dita, her colleague whose desk was only a meter away and who had often said, "If anything happens, just tell me." Not her mother, who called that night asking, "How's work?" Not anyone. On the outside, she smiled and said everything was fine. Inside, someone was screaming in a soundproof room. What Rena didn't realize was that the rejection wasn't just about the manuscript. It felt as though a part of herself had been rejected, her instincts, her conviction, the 3 months she had poured into it. But the feeling was too big to put into words. So she kept it. As always. A week later, Rena attended a counseling session with a psychologist, not by her own choice, but because her office provided the service for free and Dita signed her up without asking. "Just try once," said Dita. "If it doesn't fit, that's fine." The psychologist's name was Mrs. Sinta. A middle-aged woman with short hair and a way of sitting that made others feel they weren't being interrogated. She didn't open the session with questions. She simply said, "I'm glad you came. You don't have to share anything if you're not ready." Rena sat upright, hands folded on her lap, the posture of someone who had decided not to feel comfortable. "I don't know where to start," she said, her tone sounding more like a warning than honesty. "That's okay," said Mrs. Sinta. "We can start anywhere." Silence lasted almost 2 minutes. Mrs. Sinta didn't fill it. She didn't nod, didn't take notes, didn't lean forward with expectant eyes that made people feel pressured to speak. She just sat, fully present, demanding nothing. Finally, Rena said, "My manuscript was rejected last week. Not because it was the most important thing, but because it felt the safest to say first." Mrs. Sinta didn't say "What a pity" or "You must be disappointed." She said, "Tell me about the manuscript." And Rena told her. About the young writer, about those 3 months, about the conviction she had trusted wholeheartedly. Then about that Thursday, that restroom stall, those 4 minutes. And somehow, perhaps because Mrs. Sinta never once diverted her gaze, never interrupted, never gave an expression that forced Rena to change her story, Rena finally reached the words that had long waited to be spoken. I don't know why I can't tell anyone. It feels like, if I tell, I become weak. And I must not be weak. Silence again. This time it felt different, not empty, but full. Who taught you that being weak is dangerous? Asked Mrs. Sinta, in a tone that blamed no one. Rena didn't answer right away. She looked out the window. Outside, the rain had just begun, small drops undecided whether to grow heavier or stop. The session ended 50 minutes later. Rena didn't leave with answers to all her questions. She didn't suddenly heal, didn't suddenly understand everything. But as she walked through the lobby and saw Mr. Hardo place the sweet tea on the small table near the elevator, for the first time Rena stopped. Mr. Hardo, she said. Thank you for everything. He turned, slightly surprised. Then smiled, the smile of someone who had long waited for those words but never demanded to hear them. You're welcome, Mississippi. Rena took the tea and stood there for a while, drinking it warm in the cold lobby air-conditioned, in the middle of an ordinary day, among people moving everywhere. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt she didn't need to move anywhere just yet. Let us reflect on Rena's story. At the end of every story, we should try to find the lesson behind it. That is why we invite you to subscribe to this channel. Rena's journey shows how the habit of keeping feelings inside can grow from small, repeated experiences. Since childhood, she often heard that asking for help was a sign of weakness or something shameful. Those messages didn't change her instantly, but they slowly piled up and taught her to close herself off. As a result, Rena grew into someone who looked strong on the outside, but carried a heavy burden within, a burden she never shared with anyone. This habit often makes a person appear independent, but in reality there is fear behind it, fear of being judged, fear of seeming weak, fear of burdening others. Over time, this can lead to isolation, as if there is no safe space to share. Yet Rena's story also shows that the presence of others, even something simple, like Mr. Hardo's sweet tea or Mrs. Sinta's listening, can open a small door. A presence that does not demand, does not judge, gives someone the chance to finally speak. Rena did not change overnight, but she took her first step, daring to say thank you, daring to admit that she needed to be heard. The essence of this story is that silence can wound, but genuine presence can be the beginning of healing. After listening to Rena's story, what do you feel? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. We hope you don't carry everything alone.